Hi there, my name is Andy Inks, and I'm here with my colleague Sergey and this is episode number one of our podcast. And Sergey and I are both agilists in our day jobs, but we wanted another space where we could capture our sidebar conversations as we explore this ever changing field. And so these are probably going to be pretty casual conversations, mostly between us, but we're always open to having guests. I guess we'll just have to see where this goes. And with that being said, I want to introduce my best friend at work and co-host, Sergey Blakor. Sergey,
Yeah,
how's it
no,
going?
thanks for that awesome introduction. It's funny because I feel like best friend at work is such a term we only hear at the Gallup, like when we do the Gallup survey. But it's true, right? Like we actually have become best friends from work, and that is like so much fun because oftentimes you don't always feel the authenticity around something like that. But it is true, and that's why we're doing this here together today. But yeah, this is great. We wanted to take a moment to be able to like start collecting our thoughts about what we understand with Scrum, with Agile, how that has impacted us professionally and personally, and it is definitely something that's led us here today. And so, Andy, I know for myself, like this was not the road I thought I'd be taking. I was a nursing assistant at a hospital, in Pittsburgh. I went from a nursing assistant to a registered nurse, and I spent many years clinically treating patients. I always thought that that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Maybe eventually I'll become a nurse practitioner or follow that route. And I will say through a lot of different connections and people that I met, I found other passions of mine that certainly got me to where I am today, 12 years later in my career. So I'm really interested, Andy, to hear from you. Like, what was your first kind of time that you heard about Agile?
Wow. So, first off, your background sounds a heck of a lot more impressive than mine. I was a communications major coming out of Fordham University that's up in the Bronx in New York. And honestly, I always tell people I was the first person to go to college in my family. So, I had no clue how to start a career, how to use college to, be ready for that career when I graduated. And so I actually found myself in a hospital as well, working. We called it a session assistant, and it was kind of like a rotational healthcare administration path at Memorial Sloan Kettering, also in New York. And I just remember being asked, they said, Andy, will you come work on a project with us? And I thought, geez, what's a project? And so I went to these meetings and found out they were designing this automated patient check-in kiosk. And that was literally the first time that I was introduced to a project, and the word lean was thrown around. And so lean was really where I got my start into the agile field. And I know you and we call lean one of our, like, one of these tools in our agile toolkit. But back then I couldn't even conceptualize. I was thinking like, gee, I'm doing CrossFit, I'm trying to be lean myself.
Yeah.
What does this mean at work? And I know you had some experience with lean as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Before Agile, there was Lean, and after it was actually my first position. After I had been a registered nurse for about 5 years at that point, I had spent a lot of time like just doing quality projects, right? Like finding things to make my day more efficient, and then thinking about my colleagues and how that could impact their day. It was just fun to find ways to make things simpler. And so I had gotten picked up for a department that was basically lean coaches. And it was all about a focus on frontline staff changing the way that work is done. So instead of like traditional like top down management, it was about saying, hey, let's see if we can bring together teams of 4 to 5 people, registered nurses, respiratory therapists, secretaries that work the front desk, and find out what are the problems that are plaguing them, right? Because just because there's registered nurses over here and registered nurses on another unit doesn't necessarily mean that they have the exact same issues. And so by going into that granular level of like, hey, on 8A, what are the problems that you're having? What do you think are the top things we should work on? That to me is where you find like your most value, because those people basically speak up and let themselves know what those problems are. And so that was my introduction to lean, and starting to do things like the A3 and fishbone diagrams and spaghetti mapping and all of that. So it was really, really neat to be able to like work with frontline staff members to solve problems. So that was my introductions there. And so I guess my question is, Andy, to you back then, like, so you've got those lean principles, and then eventually the word agile must have come up there. Like, how did that start to overlap with your world?
So my big introduction to Agile happened when I actually came to work at the same company where you are, Sergey. I joined what I would call a traditional project management group. I was um, working as a project coordinator. So you can just imagine that really traditional hierarchy: coordinator, then you become project manager, then program manager, then portfolio manager. And I kind of caught them at the tail end of that, because we were starting to hear from our clients that, this project management, this waterfall method, it wasn't working. And that's when we brought in an outside consultant and I first heard the word agile. I remember I went to a bunch of trainings on it, and uh, before long here I was called a scrum master. And I just remember standing, literally doing stand ups at a whiteboard wall, which they had just painted for us. Never saw one of those prior to that, with all these sticky notes. And honest to goodness, I could not make sense of what we were doing. All I knew was that I had to ask people what they were working on and what their blockers are. I would write those down, and that became the rest of my day. So it was a really rough start without much help, but that was what got me into Agile. What about you?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. Technically, the first time I heard the word agile in a professional sense was from you. You had kind of exposed me to it, but I actually saw, and I think I was a witness to it when I first started this role that I had in an informatics reporting department. Essentially, they were working through, and this was must have been my third or fourth week. They had realized they had a lot of tickets in the backlog, right? Like we're talking a lot of tickets. And one of the directors at that time had basically started to post stickies on the window wall, like facing towards the parking lot of the building. And I'm telling you, this was the most amount of stickies I had ever seen before. It was kind of odd that we were all kind of meeting together for these like very brief, short meetings. I think maybe they called them dailies at the time. I don't remember. This was probably 2017, 2018. And essentially, all of the developers that I call them now, but all of the people in that department were picking up different sticky notes and were kind of starting to tackle them. And so every day in the morning, this group would meet together until the entire backlog was cleared out. Again, those terms did not mean anything to me at the time, but I saw something and I was completely like mesmerized about how they decided to like tackle this huge amount of work, right? But it was successful, and it really showed that through like very focused, timely communication, a visualization of the work, you could get a lot done. So that's where I started to see some of that action.
Well, and that's interesting because your timeline, you're saying like 2017, 2018. That's exactly the same time I was introduced to Agile as well. And, I know I just talked to you earlier today. I was thinking it's performance review time. And, I'm literally coming up on like 5 years in Agile now. And I think, both of us can say that, whether or not we've had, official titles or whatnot. But it's kind of like, I don't know if it was a push across the enterprise at that time or what, but both of us got into it, and eventually came together
Mhm.
when we started to work for a palliative care service, right? So
Yeah.
I'll never forget, we were doing, again, we were back in the waterfall space because this whole agile thing that wasn't familiar to this area where we were working. And we, this time around, were sort of like the leaders, if you will, in our space that came across the problem of, hey, your waterfall method isn't working for me. And that is when, I'll never forget, we made the decision. It was like a cold, snowy day. We were like, hey, we have to go agile. And I don't
Yeah.
even think we knew what we were getting into in terms of what it would take or what the timeline would look like. But we knew that was the thing. And I'd say that was really when you and I started to connect a lot. Um, I don't know. We were lucky because the trust bank was high as our former
Yeah.
director would say, right? But I don't know. We just I think once we went agile, that's when we really started to collaborate deeply.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The trust bank was full because had we not had the trust, we might have not been able to be as successful as we were. I mean, it was really impressive the fact that, everybody left their egos at the door. We're able to like say, okay, like things are not working. And this is like, we should probably note, like, this is during the pandemic. So we started the pandemic. I don't know if it's a few months in or something like that, but we're realizing like virtual work is very different than in the office. You've got a whiteboard and a group of people. And so all of a sudden, you're dealing with folks that are no longer looking at an Excel spreadsheet right next to the laptop next to you and you're kind of pulling that up. Like you're now working in a very, very different environment. And I think that hit us hard, and that was like a very good reason to pivot into what we do now, using Scrum, right, and using some of those agile practices that fall into that bucket. Um, but yeah, it made a world of difference because we went from a project that almost completely failed to turning it around within 10 weeks and being able to have a minimal viable product that went live. And so that to me was like, whoa, what did we just do here? Like we
Right.
successfully brought in the director, the managers, and be able to have a conversation to say, look, we're going to try something. It's going to be very different than anything you've experienced before, but we think it's going to work.
Yeah, and now what? It's been I'm gonna like way fast forward here. So it's been I would say like 2+ years since that point, right? You're
Hmm.
still with that organization. I have moved to a different seat, same enterprise, but uh how are things going now?
Yeah, I mean, we've completely, I think, thanks to like the leadership that you provided to us, and the training and the coaching and all of the things that come with being a scrum master in that role that you had placed, like the servant leadership, it totally helped us to transform it. And of course, the buy-in that I had, I mean, you had me right off the bat. Once we were successful, I mean, I was like, whoa, this is really great. And so every project since then has been almost an iteration of it, right? Like we continue to evolve and teach the principles, the ideas behind Scrum, right? Kind of thinking about that transparency, inspection, adaptation to what it is that we're working on. And so people are seeing that and they get excited now because the work is so much more manageable than it was when we tried to make that perfect plan.
Yeah, and that just makes me think too. You said perfect plan, like going back to day one, when I literally know where I was standing in my house when I had that conversation. I threw it out there like, Sergey, let's go agile. And I just I want to go back to that for a second because we said the trust bank was full, but I don't think people can understand the kind of coworker that you are, because and that's why I think you and I can be here even today having this kind of spontaneous conversation. This is exactly how we work, right? We for some reason are able to bounce ideas back and forth and take those egos out of the picture, keep that trust pretty high, do the experimenting. And so it's almost like, Sergey, we were set up pretty well to get into agile. I don't even think we fully understood that our own nature of experimentation with different ways of doing things was going to set us up for this very experimental type development. And
Hmm.
so I think, you were mentioning a plan and whatnot. I wish I could go back and tell myself, look up agile transformation roadmap, map it all out, prepare your leadership for what's coming. We didn't know to do that, right? But what I think we did was we did what we always do. We started Googling, we started
Yeah.
getting on LinkedIn Learning, and the big thing for me that I want to emphasize to anyone going, if you're listening and you're going through something like this, I think of this knowledge triangle that our director taught us about, and it says that knowledge, confidence, and importance are three things that you have to be successful. And so, Sergey, you and me, I think crazy as it is, we had like the importance, we had just enough knowledge, and we kept acquiring that. Um, Somehow we had the confidence to at least push it forward. But I just wanted to make a note to say we didn't learn this overnight, right? This is something that we've iterated on. We've changed up the words, that we use with talking with our teams. We've brought in, different frameworks like Kanban, like Scrum. We've toyed with scaled agile, and safe to get to where we are today. And I mean, that's a whole nother conversation we could probably
Yeah.
reflect on, what all learning we did. But
Yeah.
I'm just constantly amazed by that.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great first conversation just to acknowledge like how rarely stuff like that happens. That first off, two people can make a connection at work that feels really genuine and a lot of trust is built into it. I mean, I think a lot of companies aim to get that out of their employees, like, you know, feel like it's like a family or a brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever that might be. And that's tough. And so it has been really cool to be able to have that type of trust with you, Andy, and to make what we did, special and really help other people learn those principles and ideas. And so I'm really excited about, our future conversations. And I want to learn more, Andy. And I think just by talking to you, we're going to figure things out even further. A lot of digging ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And truly a real life example of the best friend at work,
Yeah.
having someone to be able to have these kind of conversations with, that's what makes me successful. And so you've been a huge part of enabling that, Sergey.
Yeah. Yep. Right back at you.
Thank you.